Hi everybody, I'm Girl Writes What, and I just wanted to thank everybody again for their support. Wanted to thank Paul Elam for getting me, they keep saying hooked up, as hinky as that sounds, with Harry Crouch, the president of the NCFM. I have uh, a bit of an announcement that I'll be coming out with in not too long as far as what's going on with that. And I just wanted to thank the Good Samaritan who messaged me last night repeatedly and this morning um, just to inform me that I'm associating with misogynists and terrorists who are openly advocating violence against feminists. This person cited a few cases of admittedly strong language, the kind of stirring language you would hear in any political speech. Um, a little bit of Schadenfreude over feminists who whine about the hate mail they get, and a stated, maybe overstated, determination to make noise and bring down the system by exposing the truth and/or refusing to participate in society. I guess men who go their own way qualify as terrorists now. Who knew? I definitely feel extremely threatened by all of that. But it did remind me of a conversation I had a few days ago, maybe a week ago, with an egalitarian who was bemoaning the extremists on both sides of the gender movement fence. She had some really harsh words to say about MRAs, about their anger and the way they talk about women, yada yada yada. She claims that she can't support a movement that uses that kind of language or has members that hold those kinds of attitudes. She pointed out that there had been a post that was upvoted on a men's rights subreddit which contained language and attitudes towards modern Western women that I can imagine would probably make a lot of women squirm a bit. And she therefore felt that she could not in good conscience support the MRM. Um, Although she did include the caveat that she does not call herself a feminist as well because of the extremists on that side. Now, I'm not going to really go in depth into the levels of hate and depravity and incitement toward male-targeted violence by proxy or otherwise that seem to have extended their tendrils throughout the entirety of the feminist movement. And the pathetic silence and disavowal that seems to ensue anytime it's exposed in its most blatant and ugly forms. I remember discussing the Agent Orange Radical Hub debacle with a feminist who went from "I don't believe you" to "well, prove to me that these women have any influence over anything" to "well, prove to me that they have the means to pull off a program of male-targeted infanticide or sex-selective abortion or enforced chemical castration of males," without even once bothering to say, "well, if it is true, those bitches be crazy, yo." Suffice to say, there's a great deal of anger, animosity, and extremity on both sides. And there are certainly misogynists in the MRM. I mean, how could there not be? And frankly, I'm pretty sure the bulk of the men's rights movement is a lot more extreme than the coffee shop feminists who comprise the majority of those who identify as feminist. For one, the men's rights movement is, at the moment at least, a more extreme movement, not because of the extremity of their views, but because their views are a lot more distant from current accepted politically correct cultural norms. When the vast majority of society, from government to the media to pop culture, leans toward feminism, the most moderate MRA is going to seem as far from the middle as the most radical and ball-crushing of misandrists. Um, there really are no moderate MRAs because every MRA seems to be at complete odds with the mainstream. For another, we're living in a culture where mainstream magazines and newspapers can actually publish articles titled "Do Vancouver Men Suck?" or "The End of Men?" or "Where Have the Good Men Gone?" without anyone really batting an eye at these blanket criticisms of men. And where women feel safe to chortle and gloat on national daytime TV, and likely in living rooms all over the country, all over North America, over a man whose wife cut his penis off because he filed for divorce. The very fact that Sharon Osbourne couldn't make it through the apology that was eventually extracted from her without even dissolving into giggles makes it clear that the very act of standing up for men's humanity, their dignity, and their well being is really the act of a radical. I've seen mainstream Facebook memes about men that were a lot more misandric than many of the supposedly super misogynistic posts so harshly criticized in MRM spaces. We've all been trained to see misogyny so well that we frequently see it when it isn't even there, and so inured and desensitized to misandry that we sometimes don't notice it even when it's applied with a sledgehammer. And there are some other reasons as well that the MRM is more radical and more angry than the typical carefree majority of those who claim to be feminists. You really have to understand a few things about men in today's culture and sit back for a few minutes and put yourself in those shoes. Sit yourself right behind a man's eyes and try to see things from his perspective. Men in our culture are indoctrinated from an early age to believe that they're privileged, that they have things easier than women, that women are oppressed and always have been by men, that women have always had things more difficult than men all through history. All of that. Men in our culture have been socialized to put women's well-being before their own in a multitude of ways. You even see it when people counsel their friends whose relationships might be hitting the rocks. They'll tell the woman, well, you have to do what's right for you. Your happiness is what matters. And what they tell the man is, well, you just got to try harder, work harder, consider her needs. You have to work at it, man. This is pervasive. It's so pervasive that we don't even notice it. Men in all cultures have a biologically ingrained instinct to be protective of women. And men in our culture are socialized to fight for other people's rights, to fight for the underdog, rather than their own rights, and to not complain, to not care about their well-being, to be brave and to suck it up. And they're penalized and censured if they don't fill that role. Men in our culture have been conditioned to believe any hardship they face is their own fault because they have the privilege of being self-determining. I call this perception of male hyperagency. And it's not just how men see themselves, it's how others see them. It's a perception that a man is in control of everything that happens to him, and it's a very comfortable perception for men to have until things hit a point where they realize they have no control, and it all comes crashing down. It's what leads people, when they see a woman beating the crap out of her boyfriend, to assume he must have done something to deserve it. Men want to see themselves as powerful, as agents, and as in control of their lives. And society tells them that that's the case. And accepting that there are some hardships that might befall them through no fault of their own, it's really a wall of perception that stands between a lot of men and any kind of belief that men could be culturally or institutionally discriminated against, or that anything should be done about it. And men in our culture often feel fulfilled when they're fighting or working for a cause, but they really aren't accustomed to seeing men as a category. Not black men, not poor men, not Asian men, not lower class men, but just men. They aren't accustomed to seeing men as the cause. And they have all of society telling them that not only are other causes more important, but that their own is really non-existent. If you can't examine any of that from a place that's empathetic to an understanding of the male psyche and the male experience, then it really isn't going to matter whether you're a man or a woman. You're going to see the MRM as a bunch of extremist assholes who don't have anything real to complain about, and therefore their anger is just unjustified lashing out. Most of the men in the movement were raised to think one way about themselves and the world, and they eventually arrived at a light bulb moment, usually at great personal cost. It takes a bigger shot to the chops for a man to snap out of his complacency and start thinking of himself and his rights than it does or ever would have for women who are socialized to prioritize their own well-being and to ask for help when they need it. The ratio of men in the men's rights movement who have been completely fucked over by women, or who have had loved ones fucked over by women who were enabled by the system, is just going to be a lot higher than the ratio of women who consider themselves feminists or even egalitarians who were deeply wronged by men. There's a reason the men's rights movement is still so small, even though it's been around for decades. Do you really think a man who's been socialized to deprioritize his own well-being out of duty to the point where he'd ignore horrible, horrible symptoms because there's work to do, then be diagnosed with lung cancer a month later and dead from it 2 weeks after that? This is a personal story from my YouTube channel. Do you really think that such a person would have arrived at a point where he'll stand up for himself and for other men because he had some inkling that maybe things were unfair in some ways? The way so many women often get lured into feminism because their partner doesn't do the dishes often enough, or they've been told they earn less than men. Women are more self-interested. They're that way not just because they've always had to be, because they're vulnerable with respect to reproduction, but because society both accepts and expects it. Women are also more likely to be concerned for their safety and their right to be protected from harm. While anything that hurts a man or could get him killed will only make him more of a man, because that's what women in society have needed all through history. Someone who is brave and who's willing to play through the pain. The light bulb moment that brings a man to the MRM is usually one that gave him or someone he cares about third-degree burns over most of his body. That kind of wake-up call means that the bulk of the MRM is going to be very angry and very, very motivated. And while feminists have the luxury to waste time bitching about how the expectation to carry a purse is oppressive and how women's haircuts cost $5 more than men's, MRAs have bigger, nastier, smellier fish to fry, and they know it. And even beyond that, the men who have arrived at the level of perception and awareness that brings them to set aside all of that cultural programming, they know exactly what they're up against and just how much more loudly they're going to have to scream to be heard than the suffragettes ever did. My daughter. She made me really proud a few weeks ago because she chose to do her major presentation for Theory of Knowledge, which is an IB requirement, on gendered violence. Not gendered violence against women, but gendered violence by women against men, and how it's condoned and enabled and normalized by society. Her teacher stood up in front of everyone afterwards and told them all, "I don't know if you realize this, but if you were a male student, nobody would have taken you seriously. Men are programmed, and they're expected to put women's well-being before their own. I don't know how else to put it. I have a male friend who's been burned and is continuing to be burned by a high-conflict ex-partner with respect to his divorce that still isn't finalized after 3 years, despite how reasonable he's been, how above board he's been, and whose mother is a walking black hole who chews people up, and then they don't much care whether she swallows them or spits them out, and she gets away with it because she's a woman. And even he doesn't understand why I do this. These are his problems, you see, not pervasive social or institutional or systemic problems. He's afflicted, just as afflicted, with perceptions of male hyperagency as anybody else. And because of that, in his mind, the only pervasive systemic problems are ones that are suffered by women. We are fighting against what feels right to both men and women. And the few men who can set aside all of that programming, they're going to be the ones who've either been burned to the point where they don't give a fuck how they come across, or the ones who never much cared about what other people thought of them. And either way, they're really not going to care about how they sound, as long as the truth prevails. And this is just, I can't put it any plainer than that. They're not going to care that they sound radical. They're not going to care that they sound like extremists. If they've arrived at the point where they're actually active in the MRM, they're the kind of men who have nothing to lose. Nothing at all. And that's just really all I have to say about that. And if anybody has an issue with the message simply because of how it's delivered, they can really go fuck themselves. Strong language, it offends people. So what? So what? Reality is offensive. So what? That's all I have to say about that. These issues need attention, and frankly, men have to scream to be heard. They just do, even by other men, and that's just freaking sad. Anyhow, I also wanted to crow a little bit about how my video on systemic gendered violence has been slightly edited and posted as a feature video on the website of Save Services, which is a anti-violence advocacy group that does some major outreach to male victims of especially intimate partner violence and sexual violence, and which is desperately trying to change society's perception of what violence looks like. And I'm just extremely flattered, and I just think that's so cool that they would find any kind of wisdom in my words that would justify posting me as the feature on their website. So if anybody wants to know more about the true nature of violence in our society, I suggest they go to saveservices.org and check out some of the incredible articles there, and most especially one of my favorites, their special report on predominant aggressor policies, which was just really eye-opening for me, and which I spam all over the place in conversations every chance I can get. So they do a lot of good work, and anyone who wants to learn more about those issues, I would definitely send them there first and foremost. So saveservices.org, go check it out. And I guess that's it for today. I'm going to sign off. I'm not going to clean my kitchen. I don't have better things to do, but I have other things I'd rather be doing. So I guess I will see you all next time. For now, I'm Girl Writes What. Bye.